Picture this. You're trying to build a custom house. You've got a crew of builders, massive stacks of lumber, a great plot of land, but absolutely no blueprints. None. Just winging it. I mean, it would be a total disaster, right? Well, building a software system without architecture documentation is honestly the exact same thing. And that is exactly why, in today's explainer, we're going to turn the kind of complex, sometimes overwhelming world of software architecture documentation into a really simple step-by-step tutorial for beginners. Think of it as your home builder survival guide. By the end of this, you are going to know exactly how to draft the perfect, rock-solid plans for your next big project.
So let's just dive right in. What exactly is architecture documentation? And, who is it really for? According to our sources, these documents basically serve three main purposes. First off, education. Think of this like giving a walking tour to a new home buyer or a stakeholder who's seeing the design for the literal first time. Second, it's a massive vehicle for communication. It lets new architects figure out exactly how the previous folks solved the really tricky structural issues. And third, and this is a big one, it gives concrete, zero-ambiguity instructions to your construction crew. It tells the developers exactly what modules to build and what interfaces they have to use.
To make this whole process foolproof, we're breaking this down to 5 overarching steps. Blueprint basics, picking your views, combining and prioritizing, building the package, and finally, mapping behavior while staying agile.
All right, step 1, the blueprint basics. Now, staying with our home building analogy, you obviously wouldn't sketch out your plumbing lines on the wooden framing plan, right? It would be a mess. And that perfectly illustrates the difference between our two main types of architectural views. Module views are essentially your floor plans and your framing. They show how things are physically structured as static building blocks. Components and connector views, or CNC views as they're often called, well, those represent the plumbing and the electrical wiring flowing once the house is actually running. They show elements with a live presence in the system, like active processes, clients, servers, and data stores.
When you are drawing up that module view, your floor plan, every single unit needs specific properties defined. Obviously, it needs a name, but absolutely crucial here is defining its responsibilities. You have to make sure everyone knows exactly what that specific room or module actually does. You also need to define visibility, meaning, okay, what's public for everyone to use and what's kept strictly private. Plus, you need implementation info, like mapping it directly to source code or testing plans.
Flipping over to the CNC view, we're looking at active components interacting at runtime. These components have interfaces that we call ports. You can just think of a port like a wall outlet. It's a point where you can interact with the environment. Connectors, on the other hand, are the pathways. They're the electrical wires or the plumbing pipes, managing things like asynchronous message queues, which, by the way, is really just a fancy way of saying messages waiting their turn to be processed, or client-server calls. At this stage, we care a lot about runtime stuff. What's the reliability like? What's the latency? And what are our security requirements? Which brings us to step 2, pick your views.
So, we know our options, but how do we figure out which blueprints we actually need to draw? You don't want to just drown in paperwork. Use this really straightforward 3-step method. 1. Build a stakeholder table. 2. Combine any marginal views. And 3. Prioritize and stage what you're building.
Let's unpack that first step. Just literally map it out on a grid. Put your stakeholders down the rows and the potential views across the columns. Then you just fill in the cells with the detail level they need. None, overview, moderate, or high detail. This is a real game changer because it instantly shows you where to focus your energy. If a view only requires an overview for a couple of people, it's what we call a marginal view. You don't need a whole separate blueprint for that. Just combine it with a stronger view using a simple graphical overlay.
And that leads us perfectly into step 3, combine and prioritize.
So you've got your consolidated list. What do you actually construct first? Listen, you absolutely do not need perfection on day one. Our sources heavily emphasize the 80% rule. Giving people 80% of the information goes an incredibly long way, and honestly, it's usually enough for stakeholders to just get started. For instance, getting a high-level decomposition view out early is huge. It's relatively quick to design, and it lets your project managers start staffing, budgeting, and scheduling right away instead of waiting around for every last minor detail.
Moving on to step 4, build the package.
This is the fun part. This is where you bundle all those isolated diagrams into a cohesive professional master binder that you'd hand over to the city planner. A standard package has 5 parts. Part 1, the primary presentation. Those are your main visual diagrams. Part 2 is the element catalog. Part 3 is the context diagram, showing how the system interacts with the outside world, like human users or other systems. Part 4 is the variability guide, detailing how the architecture can actually be adapted. And Part 5 is the rationale, explaining the why behind your choices and proving the design is structurally sound.
I want to focus on that element catalog for a second because it is incredibly important. If your primary presentation is the pretty visual map of the house, your element catalog is the detailed legend that tells the plumber exactly what gauge of pipe to use. It names every element, lists its properties, documents specific relationships, and details the behaviors. Without this catalog, your diagrams are basically just pretty pictures with no actual instructions.
All right, our final step, step 5, map behavior and stay agile.
We've got our structural blueprints, right? But we also need to document how people actually live in this house and how the system behaves over time. We do this with sequence diagrams. Actually, think of it like tracking a pizza delivery. Time flows downward, and the interactions go from left to right, from the customer placing the order, to the kitchen making it, to the driver dropping it off. It maps exactly how an actor interacts with the system, step by step.
But wait, what if you're on a super fast-paced team? Agile documentation is all about rapid, flexible development. In an Agile setup, it is perfectly fine if your primary presentation is literally just a digital photo of a whiteboard sketch from a team meeting. You only formally document a view if there's a strong stakeholder who really needs it. If writing it down makes it easier or cheaper for someone downstream to do their job, do it. If not, verbal communication and a quick element catalog work totally fine.
I absolutely love this quote from the source material, and it should be a massive sigh of relief for developers everywhere. Produce just enough design information to allow one to move on to code. Remember, your goal as a software architect is not to write a dense 500-page academic manual. Your goal is to capture the design in a way that's simple to use and easy to change, giving your builders just enough instruction to safely start swinging their hammers.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Architecture documentation is fundamentally a pragmatic tool. It's about educating, communicating, and directing construction as efficiently as humanly possible. Now that you have the steps to lay a rock-solid foundation, from picking your floor plans to mapping stakeholders and staying agile, what essential blueprints are you going to draft to guarantee your next big software build doesn't collapse? Thanks so much for hanging out with me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to go sketch out your next big blueprint today.